Good evening, and you're very welcome to another podcast here on Fun and Whistle regarding the League of Ireland Women's Premier Division. It's a bit of a somber one this week, Aaron. We're recording this 24 hours out from the broadcast of the RTE Investigates / Sunday Independent expose on what happened in Irish women's football, I suppose, 30 years ago, on the first false course in Leixlip, and a pretty harrowing watch on RT last night, and a fairly extensive read in the paper as well yesterday morning. It's a tough week for women's football in the country, especially for those involved in the early days of the game. Not quite involved since the 70s or 80s, but came in the 90s as the case may be. But a tough watch last night. How are you after watching that? What's your thoughts?
To be honest with you, I was looking forward to this week. Ireland, England on Friday in Carrow Road, then down to Páirc Uí Chaoimh on Tuesday, and you see the sort of revelations start to pop out on Thursday, Friday, saying that this was coming. I don't think we knew what to expect. I don't think we knew what was going to actually come out of it, and I found last night extremely difficult. You know, I would have gotten to know Olivia O'Toole a bit through being at games and stuff like that, and seeing her. She was in Talca Park on Saturday for Chelsea against Wexford, standing behind the goal as she does, watching the game intently. I would have met one or two of the others as well, and I read the article in the morning, and it took me a long time to read it. It took me ages to actually get through it and sort of digest it, and then sitting down to watch the program as well. It was difficult. It was hard to watch. It's never nice, the sport that you give so much time, effort, commitment to covering, to seeing this happening. Mark Tighe obviously has broken a number of major stories in terms of football, in terms of the John Delaney stuff and champagne football. Himself and Marie Crowe coming together. It was something when you initially heard, you didn't know what to expect. And when I finished yesterday, I think some of the emotions were probably a bit of anger, sadness, hurts. You know, the one I look at as the likes of Olivia O'Toole, players who maybe had just witnessed stuff, hadn't actually, and they were sort of cast aside, put aside. Our record goal scorer, I still say to this day, if she was playing right now, she'd still be able to sort of do what she could do. It was a dark day for Irish football. FAI obviously held a briefing this morning to sort of have to chat about that. The interim CEO, and he was sort of saying that since they've introduced their new safeguarding policies, they've had 6 additional people come forward and sort of reach out to them safeguarding with regarding the information. We don't know what that sort of is just yet, but I think the biggest thing for me is there's so many unanswered questions, so many things that were left unknown. I thought some of the powers that be outside of the actual team itself, in terms of leadership within, as it was the LFA at the time, you know, and even Bernard O'Brien, when it's sort of like, you know, there was no complaints. I didn't really pay much attention. I went to the odd do, stuff like that. That sort of thing I think infuriates, because it was just as if it was they maybe weren't necessarily important. They were just there because they had to be there at that stage, and I found it difficult to watch. I don't know about yourself.
Well, as someone who's involved, not at that time, but fairly relatively soon after that, maybe within a decade of those events in the early noughties with teams, I was angry. And I was upset, because it casts aspersions on everybody involved in the game in the early days, rightly or wrongly. And I think the one positive that's come out of this in the last day on a personal level is that I've reconnected with a lot of people who I would have worked with teams with at that time, and there's been a lot of chatter about like what we knew, or I didn't know anything about this particular incident, but people were aware of the personalities involved and others across the game. And my fear is that this is just the tip of the iceberg, in that, similar as we saw in swimming maybe 20 years ago, when 1 or 2 cases broke, and all of a sudden it was pretty much wholesale across the entire sport. And they've had their battles to get through that over the last 20 years. They've really cleaned up their act. From what the mess it was back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we've seen other things in whether it's religious orders or teachers or people who've been involved in sport. Or one comes to mind that I would have crossed paths with through sport as well, who's now serving jail for things that he did with underage boys in Terranure College. And I'm horrified by all of that, and I'm horrified by most of what I saw on the show the other night. I thought the description of some of the incidents that happened, nobody, if they're true, and I've no reason to suspect they're not, but if they're proven to be true, I feel the people responsible should be punished to the fullest extent. The concern I have is that some of these people are active in games and with the women's game in recent seasons. Like I know Mick Cook, who was named in the documentary the other night, he was coaching in DCU with university level girls up until recently.
Start this year.
Yeah, so that's a worry. That people are still employing these people, and I'm an alumni of DCU. I know some of the people still involved in the club, both players and administrators, and it's worrying that someone is getting through Garda Vetting with a history like this. But then it brings into question, in my opinion, the whole scenario of Garda Vetting and child protection, and who is that really out to protect? Is it genuinely out to protect the child, or is it so that the organizations and the clubs can turn around in situations like this and say, well, we did everything we could do. How are we to know? And I feel, and I've always kind of felt, that the child protection rigmarole is not necessarily there to protect the child in the first instance. It's there to protect the club if and when something like this happens. And that's a concern. But on a personal level, it's been great to kind of chat to some of the coaches I worked with back then, both and both good and bad, to kind of reminisce about some of the good days and maybe discuss some of the stuff that happened. And I suppose we all kind of feel, when you're driving along on a road and a police car pulls in behind you or is driving behind you, and even if everything's in order, you've got your license, you've got your tax insurance, everything's okay, you still have that nervousness about it. And I think anyone who's involved in the game, it's like, did I do something that I was unaware of? Did I do something that might have offended somebody and they didn't bring it to me at the time? Maybe they felt they couldn't. And that was kind of the main vibe that was going through all of the conversations we were having over the weekend. And yeah, it's just disappointing. I think it's damaging for the game. I think it's unbelievably tragic for the women who've been put through this. But I think you mentioned 6 new cases have come to light, or 6 new reports have come to light. I think we'll see that number absolutely snowball, and I think there's going to be incidents. There nearly has to be incidences, and I don't mean that as a good thing, but the culture was different. What was seen as acceptable at the time in society was different. I think that's all positive that we've changed that way, and they should be safe places that people can come and feel safe at all times, before, during, after trainings and games, and every engagement with the people who are there to protect you. I suppose it's also a little bit close to home for me because in the process of my coaching career, I did have a relationship with a player. It was not anything that was described in the show at the weekend, and I suppose it was something that we met through football. It happened. There was way less of a power dynamic. The age was much closer. I was a few years older, but we were age appropriate, and there was no real power dynamic within that. I was a very junior coach at the time, and it was just we hit it off. We went out for a few years. It wasn't like and everything ended amicably. It wasn't like anything that was described in the show thing, and that happens. We have very high profile examples of that across the world. Vera Pauw is married to her former coach. Sonia Sullivan's married to her former coach, and there's plenty of anecdotal stories of people I've worked with who are now married to girls that they met through football. Some coaching at the time, others maybe playing against them at the time. It happens. So it's not a bad thing to meet people necessarily in that way. Sometimes you can't help who you fall for, but at the same time, it's the power dynamic, it's the age gap, it's the controlling element, it's the feeling that you can't say no. I think that's where this underlying issue was in everything that came through that thing last night.
Do you know, the biggest thing for me watching that, and me and you have had conversations about the Sinead Farrelly situation with Paul Riley in America. listening to some of the stuff that Sinead went through, it was chalk and cheese. It was literally, a lot of it was very similar to what some of these players made the allegations of. And that's what was harrowing. Like, the one thing I've been thinking about in the last 24 hours is you look at things like USA Gymnastics, where they've had these sort of allegations up until recent years. I hope that's not the case, because if that's the case, it will absolutely destroy Irish football the women's football at this stage. And I hope it's not. But if it is, there's an opportunity for anybody to actually speak out and have your say, because no player should have to hide and keep quiet what some of these have had to do for the last number of years. Like, even some of the ones who were interviewed who didn't give their name and said they've never spoke about it for their entire life. How can you live with that? How can you I would say that eats them alive. That really makes it so difficult for them. And I feel so sorry for them, because no one should have to go through life where they're having to hide something that happened to them. And like, when I watched it, I nearly wanted to turn it. I'm not gonna lie, I nearly wanted to turn it off. I wanted to be like, I can't watch this. Like, one thing, I was in work early this morning, and normally, you'll try and go to bed early enough on a Saturday. I struggled sleeping after I finished watching it. I literally got the dog and I went out. I was like, I just need to go for a walk. I was like, that was difficult to take. And like, there's so many questions that I don't think we'll ever get the full answer to. And as we said about the other reports that are coming in, how many more will come in, that remains a massive thing. But you said something, and I do want to pick up on it. You said about the safeguarding policy, and as the child protection policies. Yes, they're there to protect the clubs, but they should be there to protect the player. They should be there to protect the player and the individual. Like, the problem is we've also seen instances where coaches have been accused of stuff that haven't been correct, and they've suffered as well. Whereas, if you're going to have a safeguard policy, it has to be safe for everybody. When accusations are made one way or another way, that there's the correct channel. Like, you see ministers tweeting and saying they want to see all NGBs now come up with this and sort of come to the table to show what their safeguarding policies is. That's probably the only positive that's going to come out of it, is that they're going to have to make sure their safeguardings are rigorous. But like, as you said about the likes of Garda vetting, like, if a lot of people can pass a Garda vetting by not having it, but it doesn't necessarily tell the true reflection or true picture. And like, I think for me, the FOSS course, everything around that FOSS course was just, it's so hard, because you see girls on these courses now, and you see many coaches who would love to have the next generation of girls only on these type of courses. But will they ever allow to have a girls only course again, or have multiple girls only courses? We are seeing the transition year course now, but even the scrutiny on the likes of that transition year course that's with the FAI will be watched over to make sure there's nothing done. And there's a knock-on effect to everything that's going to happen off the back of it.
But I think that's all positive, and I think we're in a different culture now. To be fair, I think we're all more like, teams don't necessarily, when they arrive to games, the dressing room culture that existed when I was a child doesn't exist anymore. Kids don't go into a dressing room, change, shower. We would have done that at 9, 10, 11, 12, and the whole way up as kids playing football. That doesn't happen now. The kids come kitted out and they go home kitted out. They don't change necessarily, or definitely not to the frequency that it used to happen. And that's all positive as well, for a whole load of reasons. So I think we're in a different era now. I would like to think that people would talk about it more openly now. I think the worst thing for me looking at it the other night, the events were horrendous and harrowing to listen to. But I think the Bernard O'Byrne and Niamh O'Donoghue do not come out of it well. And I think that's a concern. And I think that's the biggest problem. And it's not a personal thing about the pair of them, because ultimately they were at a slight remove from it. And yes, they were correct in some respects in that they needed complaints to come forward. And when they did, and they did initial investigations about that, the players denied that there was a situation, and that was confirmed on the show the other night. And fantastic work by Marie Crowe and Mark Tighe, two really, really good journalists who've really been battering down the door of these problems within the FAI. And it's a cultural thing in the FAI. It's bury your head in the sand, pretend it's not happening, do nothing, and it'll go away. I'm aware of an incident. Where a report was made to a club, the club dismissed it, and then subsequently had issues with a coach down the line, had to remove that coach very quietly. And that has been reported up the line. I know it's gone to the FAI. I know it's gone to the appropriate authorities. And has the outcome been what people would like it to be? Probably not. And I think that's the biggest problem, is that there's not really confidence in the systems that if you even report it and it's taken properly, that it will be dealt with properly. And I think that has definitely been a feature, not just of child protection or coach versus player incidents in the past, but across the sport in general. We've seen cases in the papers about individual children across different codes of sport who are excluded from taking part in teams because of maybe actions that other family members have done, and then they're not allowed to be released by clubs who won't sign transfer forms, and kids are left out of sport for years. And that's happening up and down the sport, and it's more to do with the governance of the clubs. It's more to do with the rules and regulations that protect the club more than the player. And I'm okay with protecting the club. The clubs are vital in society, but we need to have a nice balance where if something inappropriate happens, that people feel comfortable enough and secure enough that there's not going to be repercussions, because ultimately that's the exact same scenario and dynamic that was happening with those players and that coaching staff at the time. And I suppose anecdotally, these people have been around the game for a long time. They've jumped from job to job to job as it came. 31, probably too young to be in charge of a group of girls in their 16, 17 to 20 range, with no real oversight. And I think that's the problem, is there was no real oversight at the time. And it's horrific. It's horrific. The whole thing is horrific. But
I think the biggest thing for me is, and we've seen this change, and the funny thing is we haven't even mentioned 2017 in any of this conversation about the changing in the toilets and stuff like that, the general basics. It was only 2017 that a lot of the general basics were got for the players. But like when you look at, since they've come under the FAI banner fully, like granted, and I understand some of the stuff that was said from Niamh O'Donoghue in the sense that they were all volunteers and there was only so much they could do. But if you're on your volunteer organization running an international side and you can't do it, maybe they should have put their hand up sooner and said, "Hey guys, we can't do this. We need help." Whereas by the looks of things, it was, I think they were happy.
I think to be fair, that I don't know if that's a fair assessment. I have to defend them. I know some of the individuals involved in the WFAI, LFAI, the likes of Niamh O'Donoghue, and specifically Pauline O'Shaughnessy come to mind, and they would have been involved. Francis Smith also, they would have been very involved, and I think they were screaming out for help for a long time. But I think within FAI power corridors, they weren't being heard. Maybe they weren't putting it the right way. I don't know the specifics of that, but the FAI definitely were disinterested in the women's side of the game. And I think in certain places, we've talked about this on the show before, I think there's still a certain disinterest in certain parts of the game to the women's game. And I think that's a problem going forward. I know within certain clubs, anecdotally, within certain organizations within the league and just outside the league, maybe in the men's league, there's a total disinterest in what happens with the women's team. They tick a box by having one, but then they've no real interest. Now, that's not all the clubs, but it is a fair number of clubs. And I think we can see that across a few places. And it's disappointing. It's really, really disappointing. And I think the place for the women in the game, I think women add a lot to the game. Once I started coaching girls back in the early 2000s, I never really wanted to go back to men's football because, to be honest, it's way more enjoyable. There's less aggro and there's less kind of posturing in terms of trying to get professional deals, because the money isn't really there in the, well, it wasn't back then anyway, but it's not really there now either. You still need to be at the absolute top of the game, and it's not a thing that girls grow up going, I want to be in the Premier League and I want to make millions, because that doesn't exist. Even if you make it to that level, you might just scrape a half livable salary. So the reality is it's a much nicer environment, but not if stuff like that happened in Leixlip was going to continue.
Just to go back to it, and I get what you're saying about, them screaming out for help, but when, like, that's the sort of complaint that should have went to the likes of O'Byrne. We can't do this. We need your support. If they did and he ignored it, then he looks a lot even worse. But the attitude I got from him was, do you know what? Keep them quiet. Don't need to deal with them. They're on the sideline. But like, it's just sad. It's frustrating. But the problem is while we can comment on certain things and certain aspects of it, there is still a legal investigation that's going on, and which will no doubt be added to a lot further by anything else that does come out or does fall through the loops. And you just hope, no matter whatever justice it does prevail, and the legal system sort of takes over from here. But courageous to the girls for making the report.
There's two things that came out of it. I'm probably going to get myself in trouble now to say this, but there's two things that came out of it that really kind of spoke to me over the last couple of days, and that's how little was done to support the players who were there. And we're going through that at the time. I think it's horrific how little was done to support them when they had the problem. But one thing that came to mind, one of the named individuals was also named in the Pat Hickey, John Delaney, Rio tickets scandal. And there's plenty of articles. I'm not going to name the person because I'm sure he can afford a lawyer. But there was plenty of discussion about that particular individual as an agent between the organization selling the tickets, which was headed up by Marcus Evans at Ipswich, and Delaney and Pat Hickey. That all happened about 7 or 8 years ago. He was integral to that as well. It hasn't been mentioned in any of the discussion around this, which is bizarre to me that it hasn't come up. And secondly, one thing that came up that Mick Cook talked about, and he talked about the homophobic, or his statements and his the things he was alleged to have said, was about the homophobic environment and trying to get rid of the players who were homosexual in the group. And the reality is, let's be honest, that would decimate any team across the world in ladies football, in women's football. It's a huge part of the culture within the game, and probably within most female sports at the elite level. Let's be honest about it. But how different is it? And this is a question, maybe I'm opening a can of worms here, but how different is it to have a coach do the actions that were talked about at the weekend in the documentary, or having a player in the squad who might be older, influential, have that same kind of power dynamic within the dressing room at the same kind of thing? And is that a problem across the game? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. But again,
potentially it is, and we've seen, without really getting into it, we've seen Emma Hayes sort of say stuff about player-to-player relationships. I know she's been criticised as the former Chelsea manager, now the USA women's national team manager. That is something that's sort of now being started to be discussed as well. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if something like this comes into the safeguards of the new FAI policies that are released in terms of that dynamic as well. It's difficult one to comment because we're not in that sort of situation, but it's definitely something where you see it with a lot of players on teams and in relationships and stuff like that. And like, it's a hard one to say because, you know, I'm looking at from the outside. To give a sort of an opinion on that will be difficult.
No, 100%. And I think we leave that whole discussion there. Now we have a bit of football to talk. Despite all the events of the weekend, there was a bit of football played. Some big games. Some big transfers kicked in. Freya Monge had a dream debut for Cork City. She scored the winner in a 1-0 win over the champions Peamount United. One maybe that Niamh Reid-Burke will be having nightmares about for the next little while. Great start for her. Bohemians, a great start to their campaign. They kind of dampened down the signing of Emma Doherty, which was big news in the last week for Galway United. Leaves Sligo Rovers in a bit of bother now in terms of where their goals are going to come from. You can't really replace players of the quality of Casey Howe and Emma Doherty as easily as it is to find them in the first place. Two big losses for them in the last 6 months. So interesting times ahead to see how they cope and survive post Emma Doherty. But Bill Bowes, what a win for them at the weekend. But the big winners of the weekend, Athlone and Shamrock Rovers, it has to be said. Aaron, your thoughts on the action over the course of the last couple of days?
Where do you want me to start? You tell me. Which game do you want me to?
Let's start with Bowes, because I think that for me was probably the result of the weekend Well, them and Cork, but those two games. Let's start with Bohs and Galway United, and how disappointing.
Funny enough, the two sides who meet each other live on television this week. To be honest with you, like looking at that game, you're sort of thinking, it's a game you expect Galway to get back to winning ways. You expect them to put in a performance. Emma Doherty named on the bench for her first time in the Galway colours. Before I actually talk about the game, I need to talk about the Emma Doherty signing. We'd sort of discussed it last week because we got wind of it happening previous, but we didn't discuss it on the show. The actual transfer video, I think the creativity in it was like a game of FIFA where they're going into the manager man sort of. I thought that was brilliant from Galway. It's probably one of my favourite transfer videos. Massive signing. Will scored them goals in the second half of the season. The player that they definitely need. But when it comes to playing against Bohs, they absolutely obliterated Bohs in a 20-minute spell when they played in DC Park. And like Bohs got off to a dream start. It was a lovely header from Alana McAvoy. And when you look at that Bohs team, they've been hit and miss this season. A lot of inexperienced players in it, a lot of players who haven't played a lot of minutes. And then when they go 1-0 up, they do quite well. And like they're sort of pushing Galway. They're pushing Galway all the way. And like for me, I'd say it probably is the result of the weekend, just because nobody probably gave them a chance. Nobody said they were going to do it. It's funny, we've mentioned Bohs and we haven't even mentioned the underage story of the weekend that's come out this week with Ireland skipper Katie McCabe's younger sister Lauren swapping from Shamrock Rovers to Bohemians.
Yeah, it's a strange one. Like, I know one of our journalists got in a bit of bother a couple of weeks ago for starting off. I think it actually started with a pair of us. We were having a conversation about it. Lauren McCabe, I think I was texting you saying, you've seen what Lauren McCabe is doing up in Finn Harps. One of our reporters, I put it into our group chat in Final Whistle. One of our reporters tweeted a link to it, included the score in it, got a lot of flack for it. It was retweeted by other people who then got a lot of flack for it. And it kind of took off and got a bit of notice. It kicked off the whole discussion about whether those games where they're very one-sided should be reported on or not. I've split ideas on how that should work, but yeah. So Lauren McCabe, no stranger to a bit of publicity. At least she features regularly in Katie's social media stuff. But it's a strange one. It's like it doesn't make a whole pile of sense to me on the outside looking in without knowing any of the detail. But I'm guessing it's on the basis that she's hoping to break into the first team in Bohs quicker than she is getting at the moment into the Shamrock Rovers first team.
That's what I would think, and especially when you look at Ella Kelly getting into the Rovers first team, and young Katie O'Reilly as well, who's under 17s as well, getting into that Rovers first team, and she's not even making the bench even when they haven't got a full bench. I would have to assume a lot of that is, interesting enough, if you actually look at her social media, it actually says Bohs under 19s. Doesn't even mention Bohs 17, so which means that she's gone straight up to the 19s, scored on debut. But like even when I looked at that Rovers bench from the weekend, from that under 17s game, there was only one player on the bench. So I don't know whether more have left, but like it's a strange one because you don't tend to see someone from Kilnamanagh, from up that sort of area, Rovers all over a social post, and then all of a sudden, boom, pops up in a Bohs jersey, and you're like, what's going on here? And
well, Katie herself would have made that move from St. Francis, which is Baldonnel, right down beside that neck of the woods, to Raheny at 16 as well. So maybe it's just a family thing, but it just seems so strange that her brother, obviously Gary, played for Rovers. To go to Bohs in particular, it's just a strange one.
Yeah, I can imagine Ken Kernan sold her something to get her across the Liffey, but like for Bohs, granted she's been scoring goals for Shamrock Rovers underage teams slightly further forward. I know she's been playing sort of nearly in some of that bit of a left back position at sometimes as well, and underage football for the likes of Ireland. Like she could potentially have that opportunity to break into Bohs a lot quicker than she would in Shamrock Rovers. And like the thing for her is, and it's difficult for Lauren, because Lauren, when your sister's the Ireland captain, there's a lot of fandom on Lauren. There's fan pages and all, Lauren McCabe fan club. Like I feel sorry for her because there's so much pressure on her to deliver. Because even Katie's been asked before about potentially playing with Lauren at senior football, for Ireland, especially if you look at the age profile that in the next couple of years. So like there's a lot of pressure on Lauren to deliver her brother's been a successful footballer. Katie's obviously a phenomenal footballer in her own right. So, like, you just hope that, you know, she can go to Bows, she can do well at Bows, and if she gets an opportunity, she takes it, because I hate to see that much pressure on a young kid. I think a young kid should be able to go out and express themselves and play football and enjoy themselves and not have that sort of pressure. But like, even she's a massive social media following. Like, it's mental when you look at it for such a youngster.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of pressure on some young shoulders. But I suppose she has the right people around her, hopefully, to guide her through that and to kind of keep her head on the ground as well when things are going well for her over the next few years. And best luck to her. And I suppose to everyone at that age grade, it's a very strange time in your career, because decisions like that, moving from one club to another, can hugely affect where you're going in terms of the actual overall career thing as well. So best luck to her on that. But let's talk about the Bows game itself. Great result for them to come away with all 3 points against Galway United. Does it almost kill Galway United's hopes of a league challenge now at this stage? 9 points off the top. They do have a game in hand, so if they were to win that, it's against Treaty. They'd be favourites going into that game. It could reduce it to 6, but 6 points with only 9 games to go. Can you see the likes of Athlone or Shells dropping enough points for Galway to get back into contention?
Yes, okay. Because Shells still have. I've said this to you before. Shells' last 3 games. Peamount, Galway, Shamrock Rovers. The last 3 games. You know, when you look at things like that, Athlone still have to play Shells, Wexford, Shamrock Rovers. They have to play them all. So the teams all have to play each other. So yes, they're going to be relying on some results. But the big problem when you look at Galway at the minute is it's 3 defeats and 4 league games for them. And I think that's probably what Phil Chill will be the most disappointed about. They're 1-0 up against Wexford, 2 sloppy goals, lose that game, go to Tolka Park, lose by a goal, come to Dalymount, lose by a goal. Like, it's games where they've had chances and they just haven't taken them. So if he can get Emma Doherty firing, I think Emma Doherty can definitely score goals. And it's one thing when you look at the league table, in the sense that the amount of goals that the likes of Shelbourne have actually scored this season, when you compare that to the Galway United, like Galway have scored more goals and they've been able to score goals, whereas the likes of Shells, granted they didn't do it this weekend, even in Athlone, they've been grinding out results and they've been grinding out them wins, whereas in the last couple of weeks, Galway just haven't been able to grind that win out.
How important for the league is it that we look at the top 4 sides last weekend, all in action, all playing against teams in the lower levels of the league, without being insulting to them, but the top 4, none of them played each other. So they were in previous years, we might have seen 5-6-0 results in those games on a regular basis. Those games effectively, taking out the DLR, the Treaty United Shamrock Rovers game, 3 goals in 4 games. On one side of it, it sounds like it might have been a boring weekend, but on the other side of it, and the way I'd be looking at it, is that we now have teams at all levels in this league that can compete with each other. And the fact that only one of those 4 won is huge. And there's 4 points between those 4 teams, 1 win, 1 draw, and then 2 defeats for obviously Galway and Peamount. It really is a humdinger of a league this season.
Oh, massively. But like, even if you include the Shamrock Rovers results, and I am on purpose, the fact that there was 7 goals in 5 games. If you'd have said that to me a year ago, 2 years ago, I'd have laughed at you. I'd have said you're having a laugh. Like, even if you look at the goal differences from some of the teams this year, like down the bottom half of the league, like there is still some teams who have a minus 14, minus 13, minus 13, minus 7. But like, the big results, they're still happening on an occasion, but they happen so less frequently. And like, even when we talk about, I think this is probably a good segue to go into the Athlone and Bows game. It was a superb, as the Athlone and DLR game, it was a superb finish from Roisin Malloy that won that game when she cuts across the box. Granted, she probably should have been stopped there. She shouldn't have been allowed to get the shot off. But that was a superb finish to win that game. And we're having to see big moments win big games. Alana McAvoy's goal was a lovely header, great build-up play. But we're having to see big moments win these sort of games, whereas we're not seeing Athlone coming into the ball, winning 3-0. It's comfortable, run away with it. Even when Shelbourne beat DLR in the ball 3-0 earlier in the season, the goals are preventable. And like, you see that sort of dynamic. DLR bringing in a couple of players, Rachel Doyle coming back, I think it's a great addition. Abby Brophy coming in, having not playing much this season with Wexford. Two great additions. And I'm sure Laura will be looking to bring in one or two more just to close that little bit of a gap. That's that bit of experience that they need. Rachel must have close to 100, nearly 100 League of Ireland appearances now at this stage. Abby'd have a good 60, 70, maybe more. So, you're bringing players in who have played in the league for years. And that's the difference that we're seeing is the teams are starting to strengthen these sort of players that were happy in previous years to sit on benches for teams and not play limited minutes and say, I've done this or I've done that. That's not happening as much. That's the important thing, is that these players are now going to clubs because they want to play rather than going to clubs to sit on the bench, and that's what's helping making an impact.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers to hand. I'm just trying to look for here as I search through it, but I feel you might be underselling their actual squad.
I'm underselling Rachel Doyle. I know that for a fact because Rachel Doyle's in the league nearly as long as I am. I know I'm 100% underselling Rachel Doyle. She could have more than 150 at this stage. I wouldn't be surprised. Abby Brophy would have had a bit of time with Kilkenny before going to Bohs in 2020. So even looking at that, I'd say Abby's over 100. Massive experience that they're bringing back into that squad.
Yeah, Abby, we only go back as far as 2020 for appearances on our site, but we are working on filling in that information. But since 2020, 82 appearances in the league for Abby, another 5 in the FAI Cup and 5 in the Avenir Sports Cup. So you're looking at 92 appearances for her. Rachel Doyle, I'll just drag up quickly here. She's around. She was a DLR back in the early days, so she's floating around a good while within the league. So I'd imagine she's well over the 100 at this stage.
But she was at Peamount as well when the likes of Niamh Farrelly were coming through. Tegan Ruddy was coming through when Roman McLaughlin made her debut at 16. Rachel Doyle was playing with all them sort of players, and that's what 2015. Rachel Doyle was playing League of Ireland football for Peamount. So she's gone back quite a long way, and getting a player in like that, it's vital. Granted, she left DLR to go to Bohs previous, but good to see that bridges weren't burned and players can go back and move to clubs, because I think that's important as well in the women's game, is that we see that movement within the clubs and we see players willing to go. I think we'll see a couple of more sort of movers as the window goes on. There's no doubt some of the clubs are looking at who can they get in. The only one thing I will say on the transfers, and I was surprised at this, Emma Doherty. I thought Shamrock Rovers, someone like a Shelbourne would have just thrown the book at her, being like, "What do you want? We need a striker who's going to score his goals." So our Shells may be looking at going abroad, or what our Shells looking at, because there's no doubt Shells need a goal scorer, and it's great that we're talking about these things and the positive side of the league this year and them sort of things with the closeness in games.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, but I don't think girls make the same decisions. It's not the same motivating factors and decisions for girls as it is for boys at that level. So, again, I think Emma Doherty is going to go as far as she wants in the game. I don't think it matters really whether she's in Galway or Dublin for that. And Galway might just be more accessible from where she's based, So, and maybe she just prefers the environment. We don't know what these conversations are around these moves. I'm sure it wasn't for lack of effort that Shells didn't get her. I'd imagine anyone who heard she was even interested in moving would have, or even if she was interested in moving, would have been quite happy to have had a conversation with her about what may or may not be possible. So, and the fact that she's obviously on amateur contract at Sligo Rovers makes her approachable, makes her it's much easier to get players out of clubs when there's no financial incentive for them to be there, and so that's the thing that some of the teams are going to struggle with over the years, is keeping players who have a bit of ability and maybe have ambitions higher than what the club is achieving at that moment in time. It could be a challenge for clubs in the league.
I'm looking at something here, Breifne. Last year, after 20 games, Athlone had 35 points after 20 games last year. They had 7 defeats last year. They've already got 28 points after 11. Yeah. They're on course for their record points total, and with Shells keeping pace, the question is as you said earlier, can Galway come back into it? I think that's up to Athlone and Shells whether they let Galway back into it, and it's gonna be difficult. I think if Galway are to win the league, Galway have to win the remaining 10 games. I don't think anything short of that will be good enough for them.
Yeah, Athlone did get 58 points the previous year in 22, but that was 27 game season, so an extra third to the season. So take 1/3 off the 58, and you probably end up somewhere around, do my quick math, somewhere around 43. So that's probably the target, 30, 43, 44, when they challenged to the final day of the season for the title back in 2022. Let's move on to another game that was played over the weekend. Shells and Wexford, two teams. Wexford have kind of come back into the season, no more than Shamrock Rovers have kind of really impressed over the last couple of weeks. They'll be happy enough with the draw, I think, given the tumultuous nature of their dressing room at the moment with the departures over the last couple of weeks, just to be able to get out and get a result in Talcott Park. They were lucky at times, but they got away with a couple of things. But they'll be happy to have taken a point, I'd say, from the challengers Shells.
I'm going to throw a curveball here, and I'm going to ask the question: is where the departures that Hugh Strong was happy to make? That's the other side of things.
Danny, we don't conversation with us a couple of weeks ago when we had him on the show, and he talked about how certain players just weren't the right fit for the club anymore, and that there was departures in the off season, but that he was okay with that. And I think that could be the situation here as well, is that Hugh Strong has come in. He's not been involved in the women's game to this level before, and obviously he has decided he wants to put his look on the dressing room and on the team, and maybe he's gone in a different direction, the style of play or the way the players fit into the system he wants to play. Maybe he's made the decision that he's okay with these players leaving and has made it clear to them that there's no future for them at the club. And that's fair enough too. It's how the game is played. It might not be necessarily the most pleasant of conversations at the time, but maybe it's better for everybody. Obviously, Freda Monge looked very happy after the game on Saturday. She scored what we'll get to in a minute, but a slight freak of a free kick. That's as much, I suppose, Peamount mess up as her good fortune and a good strike from her from the halfway line. You don't see it very often, and it looked to be deflected into the net when it was going wide. But listen, these things happen. But yeah, maybe Hugh Strong has decided that's where he wants to go with this team and bring them in a new direction. And so with Waterford coming in, I know a few girls are potentially moving to the Waterford under 19 setup so that they can be part of that senior team for next year. And that's a good move from Waterford if that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. But just to go back to the game, there's no doubt Wexford at times had to hold their coattails, but it just goes to show you from a Shelbourne viewpoint is that the lack of, not necessarily cutting edge, but the lack of goals this season in this sort of game has come back to bite them. They probably on another day they could have three or four goals, and like Athlone, they'd be on their 7th league win in a row. Whereas that run has ended, and like it's when you look at Shells, it's a strange one for the fact that they've played 11. They've played 11 games. They've only scored 15 goals. They scored 3 goals against DLR Waves. They've scored a couple against Cork as well. They've had a couple of 0-0 draws. Like, they haven't necessarily scored the sort of goals that we would expect from Shells in previous years. And I think that's probably your biggest concern if you're Owen Wirren, is hitting the back of the net and hitting the back of the net regularly. There's no doubt about it that Jane Merrin had a very good game. Likewise, so did some of the Wexford defence. But when from a Shelbourne viewpoint, I think Owen Wirren will be extremely disappointed. And I listened to his interview after the game with the club's internal media, where he's talking about 2 points dropped. But from Hugh Strong, you know, it's a good point. It really is a good point. He continues that bit of momentum they've built. I do have one concern out of the game, and I tweeted on Saturday, I hope Kayla Bergen, who was due to start the game but pulled out of it with a hamstring issue, I hope that was only a precaution and there's no ill effects of that, because she's due to join up with the Ireland. She's due to fly out with the Ireland under 19s to the European Championship. So I hope there's no repercussions off that, and Wexford taking her out of the game before the game started as a precaution that's helped, because you wouldn't want to see a youngster losing their opportunity to play in the European Championships. But I think it's a really good point for Wexford. It just continues that bit of momentum that they've built.
Yeah, absolutely. Cork City, they had a big win. We've talked about the goal. Freda Monge putting in kind of I heard it described as something the other day. A shot come across like a Schross or cross, maybe. I'm not sure what it's called, but anyway, I don't know if she meant what she did. The ball was going wide. It had passed the far post, and just an unfortunate reach from Niamh Reid Burke. She couldn't quite hold on to it, but it deflected in off the post and into the back of the net for the only goal of the game. I think this is a positive sign from a Cork point of view, because we've looked at Cork in recent seasons and they have been awful. Let's be honest. Let's call a spade a spade. In certain stages over the last few years, they've been defensively weak at times. They've been exposed at the back, but they looked a bit more solid now. In theory, should Peamount have won the game? Yes. Did they have the lion's share of possession? Absolutely. But again, we've talked about this, the frailty of this Peamount side this year, in terms of maybe they won the league last year because everyone was against them. I don't know if they have the same volume of quality to do it again this year. And I think we're seeing that in some of the results this year, that maybe they're just not quite on the boil compared to maybe some of the teams around them. And they're not really in the title hunt this year, let's be honest. And games like Saturday is probably the reason why.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Just as an interesting note from that game in terms of Freya Monge's goal. So that's the second goal. Well, let's call it 50 yards because of the angle. That's the second time in 3 weeks Freya Monge either scored from the halfway line or just there, it's the halfway line. She done it in the All Ireland Cup against Linfield as well. But like, when you look at that Peamount team, like, it just shows you how much of a loss Sive Doyle is.
Yeah.
Like, Sive Doyle, like, I remember chatting to Karen Duggan at the League Awards last year, and Karen sort of saying, if Sive Doyle doesn't win player of the year, I'll nearly walk out of the because that's how highly the Peamount players rated her winning that dressing room. She has played a handful of games this year. She's been in, she's been out. I would say, if you look at that, she's probably played in 4 or 5 games. Missed the game. I know she missed the game against Shell. She's been in and out through injury. But like, a player like that, it's just a massive, massive loss. And for a team like Peamount, who were just able to keep hold of a lot of their players last year, granted they lost Tara, who didn't really play the second half of last season due to injury, they were able to keep hold of their base of players, whereas other teams were able to go and strengthen massively. And that's been the biggest difference between Peamount and the other teams, is that other teams have been able to go and strengthen, whereas Peamount haven't. And the players that they have, granted some of them are very good, the starting 11 is their core. When they start to get down 12, 13, 14, that's when they tend to have that bit of an issue, and that bit of the squad depth just isn't there. Like, it's difficult to watch, because we're both fond of some of the people in the Peamount United setup. You know, we get on well with some of the people in the Peamount United setup, but the gap is starting to appear between the other the top two teams and them, and it's difficult to watch, because you're looking at the result against Cork, and like last year they would have scored 3 or 4 against Cork even after conceding that goal, whereas this year it's more difficult for them to sort of string that run of results. For Cork, listen, they've ended a run of 3 league defeats on the spin. I think that's the most important thing for Danny Murray. He won't care if the goal goes in because Niamh Burke sort of misjudged it slightly. He will just be happy that he's got 3 points, and that's all he'll really care about. And like, for them, that makes that bus journey back to Cork that little bit easier because of the run that they've been on. But it's good to see a player like Freya sort of come into a team like Cork, and I think she'll add an awful lot for them in the second half of the season.
Yeah, Sive Doyle played 15 minutes. That's all that she's played this year. So she's been a huge loss for them.
Reigning player of the year, like.
Yeah, it's a tough loss for her at the moment. In terms of, I suppose, the others, when we look at it, the final game of the season, of the weekend, had over half the goals of the weekend in it. Shamrock Rovers and Treaty. Shamrock Rovers 3-1. I watched bits of this game when I had it on Saturday evening, and was kind of had it one eye on it as I was doing a few other things. But Shamrock Rovers, it's a return to form for them in the last couple of weeks. Like, we've been talking about how poor their year has been, but they're now back within 4 points of where Peamount are in the table. A 5 point, should I say, with Peamount 4 off Wexford. So a game or two more in, and Rovers could be back in that top 4 or 5 discussion. They've kind of pulled back the atrocious start to the season that they had, and I suppose that's important for the club going forward. But obviously, we've seen players kind of. I know Jamie Thompson missed a few games due to an injury officially, but we'd question maybe whether she was just out of form or had there was incidents there, but we can't really talk about it on air. But I mean, there might have been some sort of a disciplinary issue within the club rather than an injury.
Yeah, like I think it's things like that. But Rovers have sort of the one thing we've known this season, and Rovers compared to Peamount, it's probably very similar. Is Rovers are light in terms of the players that they have in the squad. I think the biggest difference to the likes of a Rovers to Peamount is the fact that when Rovers started slow, they were integrating some. They were able to integrate some players who've turned into be pivotal players for them. The likes of Katie O'Reilly, young Ella Kelly getting our first goal earlier in the year. Whereas Peamount this year haven't been able to. And I think it's taken time for Shamrock Rovers to sort of get to that base to where they needed to get to. The Bows win was massive for them, and we've seen what they've done since then, and how they've kicked on. Like it was another good result for them. The likes of Leo O'Leary, Aoife Kelly, and players like that who were in good form. Like we've talked many times this season about these sort of players who've had some good standout moments for Shamrock Rovers this year, and they're getting the rewards of licking their wounds from that difficult start to the season. Just on the Treaty viewpoint, I know people are going to say Treaty have lost the last 5 games, but the last 5 games have been Peamount, Wexford, Shamrock Rovers, Shelbourne, and who's the other? And Athlone have been their last 5 games.
Yeah, top 5.
Like, granted, they've lost 6 games this season. They're still only on a -2 goal difference, which means that they've been in every one of these games and they've been competitive in every one of these games. And like, it's one of them that we can see improvements. Danielle Steer scoring our first goal on our debut for them. Yeah, Kieran McCormick sort of alluded to some more players coming in. They'll take a couple of weeks for them players to sort of bed in. They do play DLR this weekend. I think they'll just be happy the fact that their game goes ahead when many others don't because of the under-19s. And like, listen, it's been a massive improvement season for Treaty. While the results don't necessarily tell the full picture, they've been in all of these games.
Yeah, I suppose the 2 games do go ahead this weekend. DLR host Treaty in the Bowl at 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. Galway Peas
is it 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock?
Could be. I could stand correct on that. It was 4 o'clock last time I saw it, but
I think it's a 3 o'clock kickoff.
Cork City play Bohemians live on TG Car, 7:35 kickoff in that game, and a chance, I suppose, for all those 4 sides to pick up points. They're all kind of falling a little bit off the top 6 positions at the moment. Wexford and Shamrock Rovers have got their act together in the last few weeks, and they've picked up points. These 4 sides need to pick up some points as well. I know Cork and Bows had wins at the weekend. They put a bit of distance between themselves and Treaty, but it's a chance for one of them maybe to push themselves into that top half of the table come Sunday evening.
Absolutely. If Bows can beat Cork, they go ahead of them. Like, just looking at Bows' last five league games, they've only had 1 defeat in them 5 games, whereas, as you say, Cork have had 2 wins and 3 losses. I think from a DLR Waves and a Treaty viewpoint, I think these are the sort of games that these two will be massively targeting this weekend, because if they can get that win, they can start to kickstart that little bit of a run. We've got the FAI Cup coming up soon as well, so there's an opportunity for games to sort of be to play games and to get a bit of momentum going. So yeah, listen, it's always feels weird when there's only 2 games on a weekend. I'm sort of glad there's not a full program of league fixtures. I actually won't get to any myself just due to traveling back from the Ireland game on Friday night, but I'll hopefully get to watch majority, or if not all, of DLR against Treaty, and then Bows and Cork in the evening. But like, it's a big weekend for them teams. That's the thing. It's a massive weekend for them teams. Just on a bit of another note, the FAI, we spoke about this last week on the show about the Avenir Sports All Ireland Cup. Good to see the FAI not playing them games on the Saturday. As much as I don't like Galway versus Wexford on a Wednesday night, I think if you ask both sides, they would probably prefer to play that on a Wednesday night and have all their players available instead of playing it on a Saturday and both teams missing some of their better younger players. Shamrock Rovers on a Wednesday night in Talca Park. Like, listen, what more can you want in the semi-finals of the All Ireland Cup? And thankfully, them games, if they are level, don't go to extra time. They go straight to penalty. So from a Galway Wexford viewpoint, the travel back to Ferry Carrick Park, they don't have extra time if it finishes level, but it's good to see the FAI sort of moving them games off the back of it. And we had that sort of conversation last week about them.
Yeah, the league table as it stands at the moment. Athlone Town, as I said, the big winners of last weekend, 3 points between them and Shells after Shells dropped points in that draw with Wexford last weekend. Galway and Peamount both defeated, which means they dropped further back from the top of the table as well. This weekend's actions, Cork City in 7th play Bohemians and Treaty and DLR face off as well. So 9th versus 10th. So good opportunities for those two sides. Winnable games, I think, in all 4 dressing rooms. They look at those as games that they should be winning if they want to progress up the table this season at all. Finally, before we wrap up, a quick one on the game. Obviously, we're both going to be in Norwich on Friday night. Feels great to say that as a lifelong Canaries fan. I don't get a whole lot of opportunity to visit, so to go with an Irish women's team and to kind of be at the game, it's nice. Anecdotally, myself and my dad's best friend emigrated to Norwich, and we spent time there as a very impressionable 9-year-old straight after Italia 90. We spent a week in Norwich, did a tour of the stadium and got a jersey, and I've been a lifelong Canary since. But myself and my dad and his friend from Norwich and his son went to the World Cup in 1994. I was only 13 years of age. Most amazing trip I've ever had in my life, to be honest. And I've had a few, but that was probably top of the pile. And myself, the 4 of us are going back with the next generation. There's 2 daughters coming to the game, 2 of my dad's friends' granddaughters coming to the game as well with us, and it's great. There's 2 little English girls. We're bringing them into the Irish section on Friday night. They're looking forward to they're going to be draped in the Irish colours as well. So there might be a bit of gentle slagging about that and the split loyalties, but it's from a personal point of view, I'm really looking forward to the game on so many different levels. It's also, Aaron, I don't know if you're familiar, I had a very stellar playing career, but it ended in Carrow Road in a charity game. So back to the scene of the crime. Very
nice
appropriate to see the goal in the last minute of the game as well.
Nice to see you joining us on an away trip.
Yeah, I know. It's on a personal note, I'm really excited. I don't know if the game is going to go the way we want it to. I think we're going to be up against it. I'd love us to get a result. It would be absolutely phenomenal. But realistically, England need a win, and I think it's going to be probably a step too far. Your thoughts on how the game might go?
It's a massive it's a massive 4 days for European qualification. It's Friday's going to be really, really difficult. You'd love to be playing England with England turning around and being like, yeah, we're qualified, we're taking a ham and cheesy. The fact that we know they're going to need a result, it's going to be very, very difficult. Be interested to see how Ireland go with the fact that Katie McCabe suspended in the game. Eileen Gleeson has already confirmed that Denise O'Sullivan will captain the side. So, realistically, without sounding downbeat or anything, the scoreline needs to be kept down, and that's the number one job for that game. Keep the scoreline down in that game, and keep the scoreline down against France, and hope that Poland don't pick up a point in either of their last 2 games and concede more goals. Because I don't really want to be playing a League A team in the second playoff for the Euros. I'd prefer to play a League B team if possible. So it's a massive week in that sort of sense. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to getting over to Norwich on Friday morning and sort of experiencing it. I suspect there'll be a few Irish. It should be the biggest travelling Irish support that they've had for these sort of away games.
There were still tickets available last week, so might not be a sellout in terms of the away fans, which is a little bit disappointing because Carrow Road's not the biggest of venues, 26,000.
But come on, it's an absolute disaster to get there.
100%. I don't get to as many games as I'd like. Aaron, as always, a pleasure chatting to you. We'll probably do a bit more in depth on the under-19s next week on the show, and we'll be chatting, of course, about that international game at the weekend. This week's show kind of got dominated by events outside of our control that we kind of felt we had to address, and the whole country is talking about it. It wouldn't be right not to discuss it on the show this week. To the people who were affected by that, the FAI have released contact details for organizations you can reach out to and talk to. If you need to talk to somebody, please do so, because that's the safety side of the game is so important, and hopefully people watched it, or people who didn't watch it or are affected by it will get whatever help or care they need in that respect. And please, if it does affect you, I suppose from our point of view, do come forward and talk about it, because it's important that people feel safe in the game going forward. Aaron, yeah, as it's been a tough week for the game and for the sport, but we'll leave it there for this week. We'll see you in Norwich on Friday.
See you Friday.
We will chat to everybody then. to everyone watching us. Thanks a million for joining us. We'll be back with you again next week. Hopefully Ireland have a results to talk about from either the England game or the France game. In the meantime, we'll chat to you then.